This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Sleepwalkers, episodes 2 and 4.
The trickster can hide an essential truth, as well as reveal it.
So what you're saying is, he stopped Keith from going through the door because he wanted to hide the truth?
Right.
Well, what is the truth?
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast promoting the 1996 Toy Biz line of Incredible Hulk action figures. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
You ever feel like a skunk at a Sunday picnic?
Who said that?
Oh, you know what's funny? I wrote it down, but I don't remember who said it. I think it was from the second episode. I note really bad lines of dialogue.
Well, before we get into this week's episodes, we're joined by a guest for Sleepwalkers. It's the host of the Massive Damage Adventures podcast, and my brother-in-law, Meric. Welcome to the show, Meric.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So, as you know, we're a television sci-fi podcast, and we like to start off by asking some of our new guests, like, what's your history with sci-fi, or maybe more specifically, TV sci-fi?
Oh, I mean, history with sci-fi. If we're just talking general sci-fi, it's definitely movies. There was always a bunch of VHSs and eventually DVDs hanging around in my basement that my mom picked up at garage sales. And so I watched the regular ones, mostly Star Wars and Stargate.
Oh, Stargate fan.
Oh, yes. Definitely. All iterations of Stargate, even Stargate Universe, which I always called Battle Stargate because, I was trying to ride the Battlestar Galactica train. But when it came to TV, it was after elementary school, coming home and watching Star Trek Voyager.
Oh, this is where the age difference comes in. That Star Trek Voyager was in syndication. I believe when I got home, it was Next Generation that was on television.
Yeah, and I mean, I eventually went back and watched the Next Generation in order and loved it. But my experience with Next Generation was First Contact, which was basically my favorite science fiction movie for a couple of years.
Is that the one where the Borg go back in time? Or is that the
Yes.
one where they go to Young Planet?
That is the one where they go back in time.
Okay.
And then I was a fan when Insurrection came out. And I was like, this movie's great. And then I found out that people hated it. And I was like, you're all wrong. This movie's amazing.
It's great hearing all the cast pretend like their bodies are getting younger. That's the best part of that movie.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. I mean, I like campy sci-fi, so it works. I don't need hard sci-fi.
Fair enough. I like, what is it, F. Murray Abraham in that with his face stretched back?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. That was almost a little too intense for young me.
So, all right, lots of sci-fi history, but the big question is, had you heard of Sleepwalkers before this week?
Never had I heard of this show.
Yes, this show is truly one of the most unloved things I think we've watched.
Wow.
I mean, that might...
To be fair, though,
be true.
I'll give it this, though, and this is not a to forgiving anything the show is, but it didn't get much of a chance either. Like 2 episodes and then canceled is not giving a lot to the fans.
That's true. And you did find that Variety review where the man said it was great.
Yeah, that's right. I found one review and the guy's like, this thing's got legs. It's like, no, it doesn't.
Dead in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that. I specifically went in as blind as possible, just started watching the episodes, and was a little surprised.
I mean, I think these were good ones to watch. I think one of them started off with a whole recap, so you really didn't need any background.
That's true. Yeah, I got a good gist of the pilot.
It was just a recap. Who plays Dr. Bradford again, Jordan?
Bruce Greenwood?
Yes, I believe the recap was Bruce Greenwood stood in front of the camera and said, "Hey, dreams, everybody."
Dreams, am I right?
You know what? I actually was not able to follow a lot of the recap because I was staring at Bruce Greenwood going, "Who are you? What do I know you from?" I'm sitting there, I'm like, add 20 years, and I know I'm there, and I eventually got it.
That is kind of the Bruce Greenwood curse, I feel like. He is, like, in so much stuff, but he's also just, like, not an actor you know by name, necessarily. You're just like, oh, I know you from something. All right, well, let's get into it, shall we? Here's the IMDb summary for Episode 2, Night Terrors. Kate and Nathan, who's been haunted by the memories of their dead partner McKeag, investigate the night terrors of a young boy who's being influenced during his sleep by a smiling trickster. The boy's missing sister turns out to be the key.
Okay.
I read that synopsis before. I think it's great that they just kind of blow the whole secret right in there in the synopsis.
That missing sister, she's going to be the key.
That's exactly what I thought as you read that out. I'm like, that's a terrible synopsis.
Although, to be fair, I'm sure everyone felt the same way. When you start watching it, you're like, why is this little girl in all these scenes? It seems like it shouldn't be here. I wonder if she's involved later.
You know what? I actually made a note because it was so out of left field when Bruce Greenwood, Nathan, right?
Nathan Bradford.
When he was interviewing the kid and he was like, do you have any brothers? Do you have any brothers or sisters? Do you have any siblings? I'm like, what do you should know that. Why would you ask that?
They do no research before these people show up. They're like, who are you? Why are you here? But this episode does start off in the pretty much classic way this show needs to start off, inside of Dr. Bradford's dreams. We're getting, I guess, a bit of background for his character because he's running across like a snowy mountain landscape chasing his wife before she morphs into famed character actor Ray Wise.
Mm-hmm. In a parka.
I know him best from Twin Peaks, but he's in a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And he's playing McKeag, who I guess they've been teasing something bad happened at Stanford and someone died, and I guess it was this character McKeag has died. And they say in this episode, he's like,
McCabe.
That's our former... McCabe? I thought it was McKeag.
Don't look at me.
No one knows. Anyway, he's this former colleague who they say drowned at some point, and I'm just like, I don't understand how he died, this man at Stanford. How did he drown?
It's funny because they've alluded to it in the last couple episodes that they got thrown out of Stanford because maybe their experiments were too extreme or they were too out left field. So the assumption you'd be as a viewer is that something happened in a dreamscape with this guy, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, he drowned in some icy water. You're like, but what does it have to do with the dreamscape? Why would they have got thrown out of school for that? They should have got their fishing license taken away.
It's a very good question, and that's what happens in this dreamscape. Bradford falls through the ice and he finds himself trapped into the ice, like in that classic way you fall through the ice and can't get out in TV's movies. And Jordan, listeners don't know this, but off air a couple weeks ago, we were literally talking about this trope, the idea of falling through the ice as like how it's like the most, growing up, you're like, this is going to happen. It's going to happen to me one day.
Yeah, exactly.
That and quicksand.
There you go.
This is the exact conversation we had 2 weeks ago with a different guest. It's very funny, but to see this trope finally pop up is very good. And it's just crazy because he's under the ice, he's looking up, and then McKeag or McCabe, whatever his name is, and Bradford's wife then appear looking down through the ice, and then they just start making out, and I'm just like, I don't even know what's happening.
Yeah, that was very odd.
I'm like, did he die drowning, or was he like cheating on your wife with you? I don't understand what's been happening here.
But the assumption also is that his wife, who's in the coma, it was probably somewhat related to this ice bath time drowning, right?
I mean, that's the best I can figure. Here's a problem that I have with this show. That's not it's fine. It's not actually a big problem. But when we watch these shows, like we encounter dream sequences all the time on these shows. But usually I can just like make like half a note about like what the dream meant, and we don't need to talk about them because dream logic's always like confusing and there's not really a lot of interest in it. Like it's just kind of random. But this show is 50% dreamscape. So it's just I'm constantly writing notes. I'm like, what about this dream do I need to remember? Anyway, we then move on into just another dream. We'll just keep going. It's just dreams nonstop on the show. We're now in Steve's dream, who you may not know this, Meric, but in the first episode, he got hit by a dream subway car and was given a heart attack of some sort. So he's come back to the team, And he's been put back in. I guess they're testing him to see how he's doing now that he's back at work. And in his dream, it's completely manic. He's writing all over walls. He seems to be going crazy. He gets hit by that same dream subway car again, and wakes up. And they're just like, "You're not ready to go back to work, my friend. Your dreams are too erratic."
No, what they say to him is he doesn't have enough confidence.
That was the scene where he's annoyed at Nathan, and then he tells him "Oh, I can't believe this dream clinic is being run by somebody with insomnia." Was that it?
Yeah, exactly. Those two, they seem to be friends, but they've basically established their relationship as one of them's a little too gung ho and the other one's a little too safe. So they're a real yin and yang, those two. So they're always button heads.
They're real Cagney and Lacey, am I right?
Very. Everyone knows that reference. They're loving it. At any rate, this is mostly just to point out that, hey, Steve's still on the show, everybody. Don't worry. He's still around. He's just not allowed to go into dreams. And I will say one thing, and you may not know this, Meric, but Ben Costigan, who joined them in the first episode, he's a military pilot. He came in the first episode to have his dreams looked at because he was being menaced by a monster in his dreams. They cured that for him, and then in the last 30 seconds of the episode, they're like, "Well, we cured you. Do you want a job here?" And he's like, "Okay."
I kind of followed a little bit of that because they mentioned that somebody had troubles with their dreams and that they were looking into it, and I kind of flashed and saw his face, and then their conversation was that he was a fighter pilot or something and he's trained for these things, and I'm like, okay, but then he didn't really do much in episode 2, so then it really only clued me in episode 4 when I was like, wait a second, is this the same guy?
Well, it is interesting because this is where Steve's biggest point comes up. Is he's just like, I can't go. You're banning me from dreams. You're benching me from the dream team. But you're letting this Costigan go in. He's completely untrained, and they just wave him off. I'm like, it's a very good point. It just doesn't make any sense why Costigan is here.
Mm-hmm.
I will make one argument though. Ben does do a lot in episode 2. He eats a lot of ribs.
Wow. Okay.
That is true. He does spend a lot of time at that bar enjoying racks of ribs.
Oh, in episode 4.
Yeah.
No. This
Oh,
4?
okay.
I don't remember which episode we're even watching now. You're right. It is episode 4.
So I just want to ask, in the earlier episodes, did they explain the whole hand signal thing that Kate does?
Essentially, she has it's called a data glove, and she does quote unquote sign language to communicate out of the dream. So she's able to so they can talk to her in her dream, and her way of communicating back is she wiggles her fingers and sends them little text messages. So
do they ever explain how she can do that, or if that's why she's on the team? It's just a fact.
She's just that's what she's good at. I mean, it is weird that no one else on the team has that capability. It's just Kate. But no, she has a PhD in dream symbology, so there's nothing special about her fingers.
Okay.
That would be great though. She had some brain disorder that made her fingers move a lot while she slept, and they realized that was why she was so useful to the team.
I thought that it might have been established, in the episode.
Or she had exceptionally large fingers.
Just really long fingers.
To be fair, based on Nathan's hiring practices, that makes as much sense as anything else. He could have seen her walking down the street and goes, "Look how long her fingers are. I think he's ready for the team."
Anyway, we've now done, off the top of this, 2 backstory dreams for our leads. We haven't even started talking about which the story is, which is why I wasn't sure if we were talking about 2 or 4 yet, because here's the plot for this episode. Finally, a young boy comes in to visit the Morpheus Institute team, and he's been having violent night terrors. He gets up at night and just trashes his room, and they brought him in to see what's wrong with his dreams. And I gotta say, this kid it took me forever to understand the family dynamic here, but he has a super complicated family. So they come in and they're like, both of his parents were orphans. And I'm like, okay. But one of those orphans has a sibling. At least one of them has a sibling. So this is also, I was like, all right, but they're still orphans, right? Then they're like, his mother was recently committed to a psychiatric hospital after the boy's infant sister drowned at a lake. And now he's living with his dad, his aunt, and his aunt's daughter, his little cousin. And I just was trying to track him. So what? How much of this family dynamic do I need to keep track of? It's so complicated.
And I don't think there's any purpose why they were orphans, right?
The establishing scene was okay, here are his parents and his little sister. No, these aren't his parents. That's his aunt? Okay, didn't catch that. Like, it took a while to figure out, and they were orphans because they wanted to put the church symbolism into the dreams.
Right.
Yeah, it was weird, right? Like that seemed to be the only reason they were but I don't understand. Like, couldn't they have just gone to church?
Well, you know what they're trying to say?
No.
Because it's late 90s. They're trying to say that you're an orphan, so you're damaged. Like, that was what they were saying, these writers.
Poor orphans. I mean, it's even tough. I have trouble imagining an orphanage in 1997. Like, what's this like church-run orphanage look like?
Yeah.
Can I make one quick point, Luke?
Yeah, of course.
One, we should mention that the aunt is played by Anna Gunn, who most people know from Breaking Bad, but unfortunately seems to be saddled with playing really unlikable women. That seems to be her niche. But more importantly, something I realized is mostly in this episode is they have this family come in for what essentially is a weird version of therapy to figure out what's wrong with this kid. But at no point do they ever talk about the pay structure. And I started thinking back on previous episodes. I have no idea how this business runs. They've got at least 5 people and all that equipment to pay for. What are they charging people? It never comes up.
It's a good question. How do they pay for that hotel they apparently work out of?
Because it seems like it's pro bono, doesn't it?
I think in this episode they might even imply they're going to do this one pro bono.
He did, yeah. He said, is cost an option? He said, oh, don't worry about it. Like, he waved it off.
Don't worry about it. I don't. I'm a terrible business owner.
You know what? And, I mean, this dad, he says, or it was actually the aunt, I think, but they say that they've been to 6 psychologists already. And I'm thinking, like, how long have these night terrors been happening if you've been to 6 psychologists already and gotten nothing?
Well, I can tell you. It's been 2 months because at some point they go to visit the mom in the psychiatric hospital, and she's just like, he hasn't seen me in 2 months. And they're like, well, that's it. It's because he hasn't seen his mom in 2 months. That has to do with when the night terror started.
New psychologists every weekend.
That is true. The timeline, that's the only way it would work. It is funny, though. On this show, I don't think an episode has gone by in which they haven't time-stamped exactly when the nightmare started with an event in that person's life. They're always like, well, that's when it started. That's the timestamp. Anyway, we very quickly jump into this kid's dreams, and his dreams are taking place in a big old spooky church with like a big glowing cross. And as they enter, nobody can speak in the dream. They're like, this is weird. We can't talk in here. Or that's what the Data Glove types anyway. And we very quickly meet a character in this dream that Kate will explain, thanks to her degree in symbology, is an archetypal trickster figure who is also a defense mechanism, and he is known as the Smiling Man.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys recognize that actor?
Of course,
yes,
but I don't know what from what.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Harry Grainer. He's one of those like just actors being in a million things. I personally know him from a sitcom only I love, which was Dear John, which was a early 90s sitcom, and he was in that. That's what I know him best from. But again, it was only me and the 3 other people who love that show.
I haven't even heard of Dear John. It's a deep cut for you.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
He is here, and he's playing a very tricksterish character. He's like all energy. It's very over the top. It reminded me of Jordan. Do you remember Matt Frewer in Generation X? I was just like, I guess Matt Frewer was unavailable this week.
Yeah, it's the exact same, like, borderline, almost too annoying to watch.
I was thinking Tim Burton, Jack Nicholson.
Oh, Tim Burton, Jack Nicholson. That's a good one, too. But yes, he's over the top. They actually, even at some point, because he's always smiling, that's his big character trait, they do this wonderful CG smile where they really pull his lips up very high. And because I've, for some reason, have started watching Enterprise for the first time, I was very familiar with this smile because that is something they do with the character Dr. Phlox on that show all of the time. He has that same CGI giant smile.
Mm-hmm.
People, they don't do it enough, I think. Everyone should have, like, a disconcerting smiles all the time.
Sorry, you don't think they do it enough?
Yeah, more of it.
More for you, okay.
Anyway, he's there. He's kind of, I guess we're supposed to expect he's protecting the kid from something. In this case, he when the kid comes in, he takes him over to the baptismal fount where he takes the water in the baptismal fount and forms it into a gray Hulk action figure the kid can play with, so that the defense mechanism in his dream can just spend his time talking to Kate and Dr. Bradford.
So, can we talk about that toy for a second? Was this, I'm assuming it was a real toy, like you said, marketing, but like, why did the Hulk have missiles?
It was the late 90s, man. They had to have, the action figures had to have missiles.
That's true. That's true.
We'll see more of these toys. Like at some point mid-episode, there's literally a break in the episode where they seem to do a commercial for these toys because like one of the characters, Vincent, and this kid just play with the entire line of these Hulk action figures for like 30 seconds. They're like, check out this Hulk, isn't he cool? And I actually did. That's what my opening says. That I tried to Google and figure out what these action figures were, and they're from a toy line from '96, and I was wondering if maybe David S. Goyer had written some Hulk comics or cartoons and he was trying to cash in a little extra money, but I couldn't find anything. I like to think he had a cut of those toy sales, though. So he's like, we got to get some of my toys into this show.
Did the dream sequence happen before Vincent was reading that big, thick, heavy book, but it was actually a Hulk comic? Or did that come after?
That's a good question. I think they might have gone into the dream and he was reading the Hulk comic. Because there was like a whole bunch of, you're right, he was reading a graphic novel of the Hulk and there was a whole bunch of references to the Hulk in this episode. And I kept expecting it to be like thematic, but it was more just like they wanted to just be like, hey, the Hulk, right?
Yeah.
At any rate, it's at this point that the kid's distracted with his Hulk figure and the like smiling man starts really addressing Kate and Bradford in the dream. And they're like, oh, this is unusual, I guess. And then the smiling man does a quick step around a mirror or something. And when he comes back out, he's transformed himself into this McCabe character, Ray Wise. And I guess we're supposed to get this idea that, I guess we'll find out as they cancel the dream immediately and they come out. And we're supposed to get this idea that somehow, I thought this was implying there's like a universal dreamscape, but it turns out Dr. Bradford's subconscious is leaking into the kid's subconscious when they're in the dream world, which is apparently something that's new to this show. But like the co-dreamer's dream can seep into the dreamer's dream. Although don't worry, he assures us it's only a 10% seepage.
But you'd bench me if I had 5%.
No.
I like that when he says it's 10%, it sounds like an oil company, like trying to euphemistically talk over problems. They're like, it's only 10% that's leaked. So not a big deal, not a big deal. And also, I guarantee this idea of your own subconscious infiltrating other people's dreams when you go in, I guarantee we're never going to see that again for the rest of the series.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like they're going to just rewrite the rules every episode.
That's what I mean. I think it's just like, it was convenient to have this sort of corollary with this kid in the lake and then also Nathan's apparent lake-related drowned past, but I think it's not going to ever come up again.
Yeah, I could be. I mean, after establishing that there's some seepage in the dreams, they just hop back into the kid's dream, and this time they manage to find a door at the back of the church which leads them out to this giant lake, and we come to realize that this kid is a fear of water or something because they see this lake and the kid starts freaking out, and back in reality he is having a seizure in his dream pod, and while his parents are very worried about the seizure his child's having, the staff at the Morpheus Institute assure them, a seizure is a perfectly common side effect of dreamwalking.
Yeah.
And I was just like, there's some problems with your technology, I feel like. Anyway, they send this kid home after his minor seizure, and that night he gets up during his night terrors, finds a knife, and wanders up to his sleeping aunt and I guess attempts to stab her to death in his dreams. Unfortunately, he does. When we cut back from commercial, we come to realize he missed her and has just stabbed the bed repeatedly. This is where I got the most confused about this family dynamic, because they come back, they're like, oh, he stabbed the bed, and then the dad's like, oh, well, it makes sense. That's the side of the bed his mom slept on. And I was just like, are the aunt and the dad sharing a bed? Is that what's happening?
I think that's
here?
what they're implying. It seemed like there was supposed to be something maybe a little bit darker happening here, but they were just like, what if we just mention it and never talk about it again?
I agree. I think that they were going one way, and then they were like, maybe we shouldn't. But they established that it's different beds, because he goes up to the dad first, and then he walks down a hallway and goes to the aunt.
Oh, that's right.
But at the same time, I was getting that too. I was like, they're not actually related. They were raised together. Is that at this point, I was starting to think, is the cousin the dad's kid? But I was thinking that he had slept with his orphan sister thing. And I was like, what is happening?
That's what's so confusing. I know. At this point, I was just like, oh, so she's the sister of the mom in the psychiatric hospital. But later, they make it very clear. It's like, this is the dad's sister.
Yeah.
But maybe what they're saying is when the mom and the dad did live together before she went to the psychiatric hospital, they just had separate rooms.
Yeah.
They just didn't want to sleep together. That's all.
The main point, Luke, though, is that this kid's not very good at stabbing.
Yeah. Missed the mark entirely. And he had a clear shot at it. Like, it's unbelievable he missed.
Yeah.
Yep.
But essentially, they know the kid's not well. They bring him back to the psychiatric hospital for just another trip into his dreams. And this time, they're back at that lake. They're seeing a dock on this lake. It's got a stroller on top. We're led to believe this is where his infant sister was sitting inside of the stroller. And when he was a child, he accidentally or maliciously, we don't know, pushed the stroller into the lake, drowning his baby sister whose body was never found, which they really drive home.
And this is the point where they reveal that, because Nathan comes in and he's pushing and pushing, like, what's going on? And then they pull out the little memory box and they're like, here's the thing, we never told him and we never talked about it and we didn't tell you because it's not important.
Yeah. You didn't need to know about the horrific trauma in my son's past to solve his trauma, did you?
He was only 18 months old. How could he have remembered that?
Also, how deep could this lake be right by the dock? Like, I mean, you're going to find a baby. Am I right?
Yeah. There's not much in the way of, like, currents in a lake.
It's not going anywhere. But yeah, in the dream, basically, we sort of see the situation in which the sister drowned, and the smiling man, of course, appears and challenges the boy to basically push the stroller back into the lake. And when the boy does this time, the stroller like miraculously floats on water. And there's this whole thing where basically the Shadow Man is going to challenge him to a riddle, and he wants Bradford to get involved. So Bradford has to stand on the lake like Jesus himself next to the stroller, and he gets asked a question about, like, can your dead little sister walk on water? And when the kid answers wrong, Bradford gets dunk-tanked into the lake, classic carnival game style, and they all wake up back in the Morpheus Institute. And correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, I was so confused because they wake up, they're like, Bradford's like, well, I've solved this mystery. The kid killed his sister. Case closed. And they sent him home.
The kid has faced his trauma. He relived it. So now the healing can begin.
I found this just so confusing because I was just like, I don't know if anything's been solved, but they really like, they just like announce, it's like, and we're done. I'm like, okay. I think they actually say it's like, he just needs to go see a counselor now. And I'm just like, he just needed to see a counselor to begin with. I don't know why he came to Dreamland.
Hold on, is there a business called Dreamland?
It is Morpheus Institute / Dreamland. Anyway, so obviously we know the episode's not over, so we the audience are just like, I guess this is a little interlude for us to wait for something to happen. And that night, after they sending him home, I guess he's not cured after all, because he burns down his home.
At this point, much more expertly, like the stabbing, he missed, but this fire, although they show like one book of matches, when they cut to showing the house on fire, it's on fire in like 5 different places.
Oh yeah, he walked around the house. He lit every garbage can up. Very much more effective this time. Mm-hmm. So I mean, this just basically brings them back. Which, can you imagine? Like, I just don't know why they keep bringing him back to the Morpheus Institute. I think it's time to move on to new doctors. They don't seem to be helping at all, these people. But they bring him back to the Morpheus Institute. They tell them he burnt down the house, and then they're just, Dr. Bradford's like, well, I guess there's more to this dream than we thought. Time to go back into the dream and poke around some more.
For Nathan, though, that's how he always knows you need to go into the dream one more time. When one of his patients burns down a house, he always says, you know what? I think we should go back in.
We probably missed something, I guess. But so they go back in, but this time, to ensure, I guess, that it goes well, they implant the kid with a hypnotic keyword so he can have a lucid dream. When we say Hulk in the dream, you'll be lucid, I guess. Which is weird, because they immediately go in the dream. They basically, they meet the smiling man. They immediately use the keyword Hulk, so the kid has Hulk powers or whatever is supposed to trigger. And the kid basically now challenges the smiling man to stand in the water, and he'll challenge him to answering a question. And when the smiling man stands on the water, he asks the smiling man, "Can you walk on water?" And when the smiling man answers no, the kid reveals the true answer to the riddle. How can you walk on water, Jordan?
When it freezes.
So does this have anything to do with Nathan's dream that we've been seeing a whole bunch of times with the frozen water?
It's a good question. They don't directly draw correlation, but like it does bring up the question, like how much of Smiling Man is in this kid's dream and how much of this is in Nathan's dream.
But I didn't know if Smiling Man actually ever made sense, because I think you said at the beginning he's supposed to be like some sort of representation of a defense mechanism, correct?
Yes.
Wouldn't it have made more sense for them to have explained it to the kid and then had him be more lucid in his dream and understand, oh, this is actually a portion of me that is stopping me from understanding something, as opposed to a guy who's there who is acting manic for some reason and then loves riddles? Like, I just don't know how that connects in any way with the subconscious.
I mean, you bring up a very good question because, you know, he's a manifestation of a, call him 6-year-old kid's dream, 7-year-old kid's dream. There's no way a 7-year-old kid is imagining this level of manic actor in a suit. Like, it just like doesn't make sense as like a manifestation of a kid's defense mechanism by any means. Like, it feels like something from somewhere else has entered the kid's brain.
And we'll talk about it shortly, but in the next episode, I think this doesn't quite jive with the eventual succubus we're going to see, who plays a very similar role.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you about this. Like, all I know is like they seem to want this character to be, I think what they wanted it to be was like a wall they can't get past. Really, that's all it is. Because once they say you can walk on water if it's frozen, the lake freezes, Smiling Man freezes, and then he explodes and shatters. And they're like, now we'll finally see what truly happened that day in this kid's subconscious. Like, so I think like he really was just like a wall they needed to get, like it was a door they needed to get through to see what really happened.
But that's a good point, though, Luke. That's what it should have just been, a door, or like the
a
dock.
riddle.
They can like the dock. They can never get to the end of the dock, or the water's always getting further, or something like that. That actually seems kind of dreamlike. And in retrospect, you go, "Oh, that makes sense." The kid was trying to illustrate through his own dreams something, but it's like, you're right. Like, oh, he. I thought it was going to be like, oh, by the way, he was molested by this guy. Because why is this guy showing up?
Yeah. Okay. So 2 things there. Absolutely, it would have made so much more sense to have like a dream logic thing that a kid would relate to, like the ever elongating dock. That makes sense. But yeah, the molestation themes were there with we can't talk. This person comes out and says, "Hey, we're gonna have a whole bunch of fun, kid." Like, it was.
I mean, it's all set in a church at that start. It really
Yep.
felt like it was leaning that direction.
Oh, it was uncomfortable at first, and then it was like, no, it's not that at all. I'm like, okay, cool.
He's just a trickster.
The writers of the show, they start writing scenes. And they're like, "Oh, it all takes place at church, and there's a creepy man." And then like someone in the network's like, "Is he gonna get molested?" And they're like, "What? No, we never thought of that." Or like, "Why is the sister sleeping in the dad's bed?" They're like, "What? Why would you read into that?"
We'll cut around that.
At any rate, what we get to see now is what really happened that day his sister was pushed into the lake. And what we see happen is we see him as a small child watching his baby sister in like a little like crib that's next to the water, which, listen, why both his parents are like nowhere to be seen. Like these parents have some questions to answer, leaving their small children by this lake. But essentially, the aunt apparently found out where her brother was vacationing, drove out there without telling them, stole the infant daughter out of the crib, and then she herself pushed the stroller into, I guess, effectively make it look like she drowned, because she felt the brother's wife wasn't a good mother, so she needed to raise the small daughter herself, but abandon the small boy with the bad mother. It was just like the crazy. And they go on to say it's like, well, she couldn't have kids, so this was the only way. And I was just like, I don't know if this makes a lot of sense.
I kept thinking about, how did she, like, I'm assuming they're all at like a cottage or something together. That's an awkward drive home where they're like, is that our daughter? She's like, no, it's not.
They showed the trailer. Like, they had a drivable, like a RV that was there. So I assume that the mom's like napping in the RV and she's left the kids out on the beach. I mean, she mentioned that she wasn't, or the dad mentioned that the mom fell asleep by accident because she'd been up all night. But yeah, like it was okay. So the sister just drives out, frames this baby, and then only steals one kid. Yeah, exactly.
It's very confusing because like, and they even say it's like, and then you never saw your sister again for 4 years. 3 years?
Yeah, years. What? That wasn't a question. Your daughter just died and your sister didn't show up?
That's true. We're having a funeral for my dead infant daughter. She's like, I'm really busy this weekend.
It is a major problem, though, because the twist is supposed to, be a surprise, obviously, at the end. But the mental gymnastics you have to do to make it work don't really make it much of a payoff at the end. Because you're like, well, then none of this makes sense in any sort of world logic at all.
I mean, it really is, too. Because like, you said at the start, I believe one of you is just like, there's this little girl niece who's like lives in the house, and they just keep cutting to her, and even the aunt. Like you're the entire episode, you're like, there's no purpose to these two in the story, and they're only like basically hanging around the background so that they can have this big reveal at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a couple of shots where she's like framed in the middle while other people are having a discussion. You're like, look at this 6-year-old girl, and you're like,
But mystery solved. Good news for this family. Their daughter is still alive. They just get to, and she's in their home. It's so easy. The family's reunited, and the episode kind of wraps up with going back to Bradford's dream about this character who drowned at the Stanford Institute. He goes to burn a photo for some reason of him and his friend, tosses the photo in the fire, and the photo of Ray Wise in the fire gets a big CG smile. So I guess maybe Smiling Man's coming back?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
I thought at several points in this episode, I'm like, okay, are we watching a supernatural type show? Like, is this actually like an invading force that's in their dreams?
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking it's going to go that way. And so far, every episode has decided it's like there's always a scientific, symbolic explanation. There's never been anything supernatural. Mm-hmm. Until episode number 4. Let's get into it. Here's the IMDb summary for Forlorn.
So, what you're saying is on some unconscious level, all these women, forlorn, are rebelling. I'm woman, hear me sublimate.
You should hear some of their stories. I mean, there is so much repressed anger at the men in this town. It's just yearning for expression. And look, this is the icon from the copper mine. If I just do this... Look.
The symbol for female.
One by one, the men of a small dying mining town of Forlorn are inexplicably falling victim to sleep paralysis after dreaming about a red-headed succubus that seduces them before turning into a wolf and attacking them.
I mean, that's it. Don't need to watch the episode.
That's a much better synopsis because all of that information is given in like the first 3 minutes.
That is true. This is a great way of just like, it's everything you need to know about what's about to happen here.
Also, who wants to live in a town called Forlorn?
I'll tell you, it's all yokels from Central Casting. I was watching this, I'm just like, this casting is like a real insult to small town America. It's just like, they just tried to they just cast everyone and like, stand there slack-jawed like you're a yokel. I'm just like, this is very rude.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they've been cast from a horror movie. They're the people you meet that tell you not to go down the road. That's who these people are all. They're like, well, I don't know. There's no gas here and there's no phone, but I wouldn't go down that road.
So I'm going to preface a lot of my comments on this episode with the fact that it was so much cringe. And that comment about the casting and saying like, oh, small town America. Like, yes, they were like, you're from a small town. You're the worst. This, you're the worst. This, you're the worst. And they just kept bashing these people. And I was like, this is...
At the same time, though,
cruelty.
I think this is our sexiest episode.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, it starts off in a dream that is really... This is the most softcore we've seen since Nightmare Cafe, probably.
I'd agree.
We see a real greaseball going into a mining cave. He meets a lady in there who strips down to have sex with him. And when she asks him if he loves her, and he says yes, of course, but she does not believe him, so she turns into a wolf, chases him into the woods, he steps on a bear trap, and then is eaten by that wolf.
I mean, fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough. Mm-hmm. And this dream, it turns out, is affecting several of the men in the town. They're all having this exact same dream, and we are going to see it repeated 5-6 times in this episode. We're going to say this exact same sequence of events with a different man in that role so many times.
let me just bring it up now, and I'm sure we'll get into it more as we go through. Does this make sense, just overall for this show, that they're going into people's dreams because they want to solve some sort of mystery? Fine.
Yes.
But
yes.
why would the people keep having the same dream over and over and over? It kind of makes sense in this episode, but in other episodes, they've led the person to a certain thing so they could solve it. Like in the first episode, they were like, anything happened in your childhood? So the guy goes to his childhood home. Or, hey, we're in a church. There must be something here with Smiling Guy, or whatever it is. But it just seems like there should be another step of them having some sort of conversation and investigation and then pushing it into the dream. But in this, it's like, what, these guys just keep having the same dream over and over and over and over for all eternity?
Yeah, this episode, they certainly aren't doing investigation into the dream. They just seem to be like going in and watching what dream they're having. They're like, oh, that's weird. They're all having the same dream, but they don't like attempt to make. And I'm not sure if the idea is these men, because they're all basically what's happened is they all have sleep paralysis. Basically, when they all woke up, the part of your brain that keeps you from thrashing around at night hasn't turned off, so they can't talk, they can't move, they seem to be conscious, but they're just like stuck in this paralysis. But they don't imply that they're like. They imply their minds are still working, so it does feel like they'd be able to talk to the people in the dream, but they never do. They just let these men relive the nightmare over and over again.
Yeah, you'd think that, like you said, that their established process is they're going to contact these people and they're going to walk them through and ask questions, but they don't do that. They just watch the show.
Yeah, they're just like, what? Let's see what happens in this erotic dream. Oh, it's the same.
One at the same...
Is it also implied then that, let's say I'm one of these dudes in the dream, I'm with the woman, she eats me as a wolf, I then go and do it again over and over and over and over with no knowledge of what just previously happened?
I think that's what's implied. Yeah. And I mean, they also established like, hey, we're doing a house call to this small town. We've only brought 2 pods because we couldn't get a slightly bigger truck and bring 3. So it's only Kate who's in there. Maybe they just want to be observers because they only have one person.
Yeah, they never really explain what's like. It does feel like a little bit of a break from the usual like their investigation. This investigation is primarily done in the waking world. Anything happening in the dream world is just observing this dream over and over again. Although, man, what a day on set! You just set up that camera once, and you just cycle like 7 actors through the exact same setup. They're all just standing next to the cameras, like, you go. All right, now you go. Anyway, yes, they've been invited out to Forlorn to investigate this. The CDC has called them in, but as the like head of the CDC who's running this, he's not too happy about it. But he's been forced to bring the Morpheus Institute in because Bradford has powerful friends in Washington. Like, why does man with crazy dream institute have powerful friends in Washington? Doesn't seem like he would.
Yeah.
It also feels a little bit like just of its time of this. You saw a lot of this sort of government mistrust in TV, I think, post X-Files, where it's like these government organizations, they're all up to something and they don't like each other. And all, it's like, because like in this episode particularly, Nathan's really snarky. Like he makes some comment about the CDC and then later on he's being snarky. And I'm like, why? Who cares about any of this?
Well, and then the way that the episode ends, not to give too many spoilers, but it totally plays into that trope of the government is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the government's stepping in to take over, and I was just like, this is a new turn for this show. Why is the show upset with the government suddenly? Anyway, the Forlorn has basically been quarantined because of these dreams. They don't know what's going on, but a whole bunch of guys are doing it. And as Kate points out, no ladies have had this dream yet. So she starts formulating some theories about mass hysteria and like why it might only be affecting men, and like it's interesting. She's kind of pointing toward like if they're all from the mind, maybe some sort of traumatic event happened or it was PSD, and she starts bringing up like, oh, there was a town that had a similar event back in the 70s where they all shared some sleep paralysis. Like she starts bringing all these ideas up, and Bradford could not be more rudely dismissive of her this episode. Anytime she brings up an idea, he's just like, I don't like it.
No, that doesn't make sense.
I actually was pretty sure from the beginning, again, because he was being so dismissive and so snarky, what I thought was going to be the point of the episode was there was, to your point earlier, Meric, that there was maybe some supernatural force that was taking over this town and making the men all act in a certain way. And because they were now in the town, they were all acting more aggressive or insulting towards women. I thought that's where it was going to go. And they kind of implied it with the performances, but then that's not what it is all.
No, and then it just comes off as really horrible misogyny.
Yeah, there is literally so many scenes where Kate is trying to theorize what might be happening here, and you think it's going to be, oh, there's something horrible in the subconscious that's making the men mean. But then at the end of the episode, they're like, no, the men on her team are just mean to her.
Yeah. And she just plays it off. Okay, so 2 more quick things. One of the dismissive things, for some reason, Nathan tries to play off, like dismiss her in front of the CDC guy. Like, oh, don't worry about that collective unconscious thing. We haven't developed that. And suddenly he's on the government guy's side.
Yeah, he seems to really want to impress the CDC man for some reason.
And then the other thing, when she brings up the other village that happened a couple of years ago, they specifically say, oh, it was down in the Yucatan. And then there's just this whole dismissive tone about this situation that happened to, those people out in the bush that don't know the science. And it's the same tone that they take with the people of the town and with their guide in the mine later, which you might bring up.
Oh, yeah, these are real big city dirtbags coming to this small town and really condescending to everybody they meet.
And I would say 2 points of pretty out there racism.
Yep, yes, that's definitely happening as well. This episode is real, just misstepping every step it takes.
Yep.
But let me make the point, though, again. Our sexiest episode.
Yeah.
Really, they're really like, listen, just ignore the rest of this. We're going to make it sexy. But yeah, we just go through a whole sequence of things where like they're looking in dreams, they're not finding answers, they're going to try an experimental drug that might bring them to paralysis. It's not working. We get a weird aside where Steve and Vincent are having like having a conversation. They're like, hey, want to talk about our sexiest dream since we're in sexy dream town? And they're like, yeah, what's the weirdest one you've ever had? And I'm just like, why am I listening to this?
Yeah, exactly. And Jordan, that totally plays into that idea that there must be something affecting them. And then at the end, when there isn't something affecting them, you're like, oh, they're all just assholes.
It does really feel like this was a rewrite problem. Like we were saying in the previous episode, I think there probably was something a little bit darker in the episode. Maybe there was some sort of inappropriate relationship with this kid that they just kind of glossed over in the next draft. And that's what it feels like in this too. It feels like that was what this was supposed to be. And then someone went, well, we don't want that to happen for some reason, so let's just forget it. But they left in them all being jerks for no reason.
It's true. It's great. Did you guys catch the 2 sexiest dreams these characters had, or weirdest sexiest dreams?
Yeah, I think I wrote those down.
I've got them here if you guys want to hear them again. One of them, his sexiest dream was a pilot whale having sex with a bottlenose dolphin. Mm-hmm. And Steve says, that's nothing. I have a reoccurring dream where a gang of highly trained circus freaks and some melons. I'm like, what?
And I'll just leave it at that.
I don't know what you call this. I don't know if it's a trope, but you see this a lot in TV where people imply something sexual, and the joke is always, isn't this crazy? And I don't think it's funny. It never works. And it's just, you see it all the time, like, hey, what's that water balloon and gloves and tricycle for? They're like, well, he's got a crazy sex life. I'm like, what? Like, who thinks this is funny? But someone does, because it's constant in TV.
I mean, they've dedicated an entire scene to it in this show. Never comes back. Not important in any way, shape, or form.
And it doesn't build the characters at all. It's not like we've learned anything about them. It's a time waster on a show that's running out of time rapidly.
So, you know what? For me, it actually did build the characters. Because to me, having not seen the first episode, I was like, okay, this guy, Vince, he's the guy who likes Hulk comics. That's all I know about him. And then this other guy, he's been in the background in the other episode. I had nothing. And then he has this, oh, I can outdo you with my weird sex dream. And I'm like, okay, he's the weird horn dog.
I mean, that is his character.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, I mean, maybe that was already established in the first episode, and I get to catch up finally.
I mean, I think these characters, honestly, you've seen the most we've seen of Vincent. Knowing he's a Hulk fan, and now this bottlenose dolphin dream, this is the most we've come to know about that character. And the only thing we know about Steve is he's a jerk. So this just confirms, hey, he's still a jerk.
Yep.
Anyway, the team then takes a tour of the mine to look for clues. And they start going down this weird, and they've done this already in this episode, but that like the guy giving the tour of the mine is like an indigenous guy. He's just like, I work at this mine, and they're like, oh, so you're really in touch with your dreams, aren't you? And he's like, what? I'm just a guy who works at a mine.
And there's that second point I was talking about. I'm like, why?
Well, they've gone down that road once already. This shows.
Good.
It's that's Kate's subplot. Is she thinks indigenous people are really into their dreams.
Oh, that's so far. Kate has seemed like the most redeemable character in this episode and in the show, but then we get that. But like, yeah. So that guy Vince, he's walking down and he's explaining to this guide the world has magnetic fields and they cause these things, and heavily imply your ancestors were probably just doing that. Your spirituality doesn't matter. And I'm like, oh no, that does.
It's true. And this guy's only in this scene for this one moment to give this tour of this mine. And my favorite part of this mine tour is he's just like, they shot a giant bug movie here one time.
Yeah, that was good. I wonder if that's actually true. Like, was that maybe they used that that location for a bug movie, and this production company knew that and just wanted to throw it in?
Yeah, the writers got a tour of the mine at some point, and the guy giving the tour is like, "We shot a giant bug movie here once." They're like, "Oh, that's a great line. We got to get this in the show."
That in.
Anyway, so like, and again, all that happens on this tour is like Kate sees a symbol that she saw in the dream, and when she points it out, Bradford's like, "Shut up."
Yeah.
Don't tell me what you saw in the dream.
He's like, oh, sir, are you telling me about symbols as the symbol specialist? I don't want to hear about it.
Yep.
But this whole tour of mine is only there because as they're about to leave, one of the women in bookkeeping steps out to tell this guy he has a phone call, and Kate sees her and she's like, that's the succubus I saw in all those dreams.
It's an interesting point, though, because the scenes we're going to come up to next are sort of like talking to her and investigating her, implying that they think she's somehow involved with it, which, okay, I guess that makes sense. But not for this show, because this show has established time and time again that everything you're seeing in the dream is symbolic for something. So why they would think that this woman is not representative of something else? Like, could it not just be that clearly there's some connection because all the men are having the same dream, but like why they think she has power specifically, this like clearly unfortunate woman is like involved in some way. It didn't seem to jive with anything we've learned so far.
It is weird. And then because they take her into an interview immediately after this, and the interview is basically just like, hey, did you have sex with those men? She's just like, I dated a couple of them, but hold on a second here.
Yeah, and so that's what I was going to talk about. That setup there where they put her into like a barn on a chair in the middle of this empty space and bring in the sheriff. It looks like they're going to torture her. Yeah, and they bring in the sheriff for some reason. And it's like, why is this suddenly a criminal investigation when it's supposed to be this woman's sex life? Yeah. It was like, can't we just have a conversation with her? Maybe if you said it in the diner, there might have been some actual narrative build.
They have to bring her aside and say, hey, do you sleep with a lot of men? And she's just like, this is rude. And then they're like, all right, we're sorry we were very, like, a much of an attack on your lifestyle. Could we invade your dreams?
Yeah. And you know what? She's actually like really helpful for a second when she's like, wait, do you think that it's a venereal thing? Like she's worried for these people and herself, but like.
It's true. And then like this sheriff who has not been a character other than to point him out at the beginning of the episode, like, hey, that's the sheriff. And you're like, I don't care. He's now back in a big way because he is married. After this interview where they're like, we're going to go into your dreams and poke around, just see if you have anything to do with all this paralysis, the sheriff takes her out back of the mine and is just like, hey, Anna, I've been cheating on my wife with you, and I don't like these people are asking questions about you, so I'm just going to push you off this cliff.
Out of left field.
I get that he didn't want the affair revealed,
no.
But like you could have said this to these, let's say for some reason these dream people have some authority. He could have said, just so you know, I've also had a relationship with her. It's unrelated. Why that suddenly makes him a murderer? Is this because he's murdered people in the past? It's like, no, just because we need to get rid of her.
I was going to say, and he like just walks her out of that barn and then just pushes her off the nearest cliff.
That's actually 2 scenes later because she goes to the, unless the barn is where they have
you're right. They do go check out the dream pods in the community swimming pool.
Yeah, and so he's not even there. So then he takes her after that, and I don't even know. Okay, one more thing in that scene with her interview. This is where suddenly she's like, all these people are going to turn up like those crippled men. And I was like, ooh, that's a word choice.
They're just small town yokels. They don't know no better. But yes, she's now dead. Also pregnant with the sheriff's kid. I don't know. Who cares?
Of course. And she's pregnant because of course she is.
Just a little throwaway line. But so she's dead. Their only lead is gone. The sheriff goes to bed that night. Wakes up paralyzed in the morning.
That's what happens.
And the Morpheus Institute people are just like, this is crazy. How can she be attacking people from beyond the grave? And I'm just like, so you think this is now, like, everything I know about this show is you don't believe in psychic connections. But now you're flat out just like, somebody's attacking men in this town in their dreams. And I'm just like, I don't know what's happening anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, this is when Kate starts, like, she really starts pitching this idea about, like, there's this, like, maybe what's happening in this town is this underlying misogyny that all the women in the town, perhaps their subconsciouses are attacking the men to, like, offset it. And, like, once again, every colleague in this place just shuts her down. Just, like, every single one of them is just like, we just hired you to be a pretty face. Shut your mouth.
And she calls them out on it.
She does. And at some point, they kind of half acknowledge it, but they also still dismiss her, and she's forced to, like, giggle it away and be like, I guess you're right.
Yeah, they're
Exactly.
a jerk. She's like, I got an idea. They say, no, you're stupid. She's like, guys, you shouldn't say I'm stupid. And then he's like, women, am I right? And then they all laugh about it.
Yeah. And then she's like, I guess it's just my mystique. And he's like, I don't get that. Like, oh, that was just the worst scene.
It is funny because, like, this part of the episode, it feels like they're about to get into some, like, really uncomfortable, like, areas, but, like, perhaps, like, an interesting place for the show to go to discuss this idea of, like, misogyny and, like women's roles and, like, how men treat them. It feels like they're about to get into it and, like, seriously in this episode, and then they just, like, wave it away like, women, am I right?
Yeah.
Jordan, you mentioned this earlier about Costigan, who's very backseat this episode. He's barely doing anything but sitting at this diner eating ribs. And that is because he's going to be the one character who is not like the big city snob, and he makes friends with the owner of this bar, Lila. So we'll get a few scenes where the two of them are really chatting it up. They're becoming, friendly. He's a nice guy. They're having a good time. But for some reason, in this scene where they're being very dismissive of Kate, she walks up to their table because they're having this meeting at her restaurant. She's like, do you guys need anything else at the bar? And Costigan just turns to her and she's like, shut up. Why are you talking to me? Out of nowhere, like, his character has not been rude to her this whole time, but suddenly he's just, like, the rudest man on earth to her.
Well, it's because it's a plot point, and that's why they need him to do that. But it doesn't, you're right, it doesn't make sense in this world, because all he would have had to say is, no thank you, and she would have left just the same as saying something nasty to her. But it's like, oh, because it's going to be a point later, and it's a shame, not that this episode was, hitting home runs into this point, but it's such an easily fixable thing that doesn't stick out so badly if you just have him just be normal. But it's like, again, I was like, there's no way, he must have something's happening to him. There's no way he'd be such a jerk. It's like, no, he is. He's just a jerk for no reason.
Yeah, this is where it feels the most. This is where I thought the same thing, Jordan. I thought this was going to be like everyone in this town is being affected by something, so the men are becoming jerks, and this is what, like, and it felt, because it's so against character for him to be so rude to her, that I was like, oh, now I see where this episode's going. But it turns out it's not. Like, he was literally, we're just supposed to know his character is a jerk to waitresses sometimes.
Yeah.
But because he was a jerk to Lila, he heads home that night. And, actually, before I get into that, I'm just going to raise one point. I'm going to ask if you guys notice this in this scene. It's very minor, but they imply in this scene where they're being rude to all the people at this restaurant that none of the men on the team are sleeping because they're worried about the succubus getting them in their dreams. Is this supposed to be a subplot we were supposed to pick up on, that they're not sleeping and maybe that's why they're jerks?
Good point, because they did mention the pills and they kept calling for coffee.
I don't know. It doesn't matter, but, like, I just kept they just kept dropping weird hints to other things happening that maybe you're right, Jordan. Maybe they, like, rewrote this episode or re-edited it so heavily. There's just all these weird things that I'm just like, is this important, or did you guys just forget this was in the episode?
2 other times they've really gone out of their way to show that people in the town are not sleeping. The CDC guy says everybody is, like, on edge and they're not sleeping. And when they do the establishing, when they drive in and they're just panning across all of the locals, you can see that there's makeup on their face showing that they have bags under their eyes.
Oh, man. This episode is such a mess. Like, so there are clues to it, but for whatever reason, they don't want to use them.
Luke, it may be a mess, but I will make the point. It's our sexiest episode.
I mean, you can't take that away.
You can't take that away.
For sure.
No.
Anyway, let's go back to what I was going to say. Is Costigan's rude to Lila at the bar. That night, he goes to bed, immediately has the same paralysis dream, attacked by a wolf, sex with a succubus. He's now in his paralysis coma. That morning, they get a call. They're just like, the rest of the Morpheus is dude, because they don't keep track of their own members. They get a call, and they're like, terrible news. Costigan's paralyzed. They found him at the mine last night. It's like, wait, what? He sleeps at the mine?
Yes, he does.
I was like, is this a plot? Like he was investigating the mine and something happens? Like, nope, they found him asleep at the mine and paralyzed. I'm like, I don't know what's happening on this episode. Anyway, doesn't matter. Just to drive home that it's really Lila, the bar owner, who's responsible for all this paralysis. She basically shows up to visit this like incapacitated Costigan and like real like Hannibal Lecter style, just like stand over him and mock his paralysis. And it kind of explains just like, I'm not the most attractive lady on earth, so I'm mad at men. So that's why I realized suddenly, I don't know why, but I can go into their dreams and get my revenge on them with this paralysis. Here's some flowers.
You know what, though? I'm going to give her that. A lot of times you see villains in TV, give their whole plan and mock the hero, but very, very seldom do you see them give a nice little gift when they leave.
It's true. Also, she's a master of disguise. Did you notice how she was wearing those blue scrubs, and as she left, nobody noticed her, and she took them off and held them to her chest?
It's true. She's a trickster that way, and it's because she's a middle-aged woman, so nobody notices her.
Yeah, plays to theme. There you go.
It all plays to the theme. At any rate, because she's left these flowers, Costigan is able to like point at them with his eyeballs when the team comes to visit him, and they're like, "What is it? What is it, Lassie? What are you trying to tell us?" And he because he's a pilot, this is why this comes important. He can blink in Morse code, which is good because now they don't have to like have the team discover any mysteries or learn anything. He can just explain with his eyeballs in Morse code, Lila's the bad guy, go get her.
It takes a while, but it's effective.
Did you notice that Lila left the exact same plant for some other patient? I don't remember exactly which one it is, but they do show that exact same little potted plant in a different scene when they're going through the people.
Oh, that's crazy. I know I hadn't noticed that. There's like, I'm not going to get into this too much, but like, while all this kind of like side plot is happening with like them discovering Lila, there's like a tiny thread that gets picked up and dropped immediately, which is I think to raise the stakes, but like, I think the sheriff has a heart attack
he dies.
Paralysis and dies, and then they're like, uh-oh, we have to save Costigan before this happens to him. But I'm like, there's like 12 other guys here who this hasn't happened to. I don't know. There's this weird, they're constantly trying to raise the stakes with these like random throwaways. That's
a trope, right? The murderer who is going to get away with killing the small town girl dies.
Yeah.
Justice was served.
They couldn't let him get away with it.
For throwing a pregnant, promiscuous woman off of a cliff just because she liked to have sex.
Had it coming. This show is so bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kate goes and just like confronts Lila. She's like, yo, you're the succubus. We figured it out thanks to blinking. And like Lila freely admits it's true. She's like, listen, I do it because men are very dismissive of me and this is my revenge. But they really make a point. They're like, we don't know the science behind this. So everybody just has to constantly be like, we have no idea how it works, but she's doing it. And she basically agrees to let Kate go into her dreams to investigate. And they're all like, she's lying though, right? She's going to attack you in their dreams. Kate's like, 100%. We cannot trust her in any way, shape, or form.
I loved that because I was watching the scene and I'm like, why is she suddenly, oh no, yes, of course, I should help you. I'm like, that was a really fast thing. And then they cut like, do you trust her? No. I'm like, oh, that was smart. Well done there.
So Kate goes into Lila's dream, but she's going to bring a defense mechanism. She brings along with her the concept of a mirror.
I didn't understand how this works. I mean, I get it works in this plot, but I don't understand how that works at all. And again, let me just mention, we've seen that in, I think, the first or second episode. She could change her appearance if she wanted. So I was like, just turn into a bear and kill the wolf. How about that?
Yeah, it was very funny. They really were like, just so you know, this is a Medusa episode now.
They mentioned Medusa too when they were saying that different types of succubuses.
Right.
I'm like, Medusa's not a succubus.
I guess that's true. She's not a succubus. Is she?
I mean, I guess she froze a whole bunch of men. She paralyzed men. There's the connection.
This show's genius. Anyway, Kate goes into her dream. Of course, she basically, like, she gets to see the bar, and it's full of paralyzed men, and then she bumps into Lila, who's like, hey, I look at all the things I can morph into. I morph into Kate because she's so pretty, and men want to see, and now I morph into a wolf because I hunt men as a wolf now. And it's just to, like, lay out all the plot points of this Lila character and, like, how she does everything. She goes to chase down Kate as a wolf and eat her, but Kate pulls out the mirror and shows Lila her own face in the mirror. And, of course, like Medusa, she's paralyzed herself.
So, just killing the momentum on this finale a little bit, I want to jump back to the wolf symbolism, because that was actually done pretty cool. And if they did this in every episode, that would kind of be interesting. Because they were like, what does the wolf mean? And the guys around the table are like, alpha male, hunter, murderer. And she's like, no, wolves are nurturing and pack animals. And like, so if they had done that, like society's expectation of symbolism versus real world symbolism and how those like combine in human psyche, that would have been a cool plot. But no, it's just throwaway dialogue.
No, that's Jordan. You mentioned this in the other episode when last two episodes were all about what happens in dreams. It's like everything's the opposite. Like that's as much research as they put
okay.
Truly, I believe last episode was like, how do we get out of this maze? In the real world, you'd go left. So in the dream world, you should go right.
Yeah, which, again, they change the rules every episode, so you just have to understand that. So it's like, is the wolf symbolic for something greater? No, it's just like we need something to eat people.
Yeah. She likes wolves.
Yeah.
So Kate defeats her by using a mirror, and now Lila's paralyzed. She's in her own sleep paralysis now. They wake up. The experimental drug that wasn't working before is now working, so all of the men in town have been saved. But, of course, it won't work on Lila because whatever her superpower is, it doesn't let her come out of it. And they even say, they're like, we'll never figure out how, quote, Lila's witchcraft worked. I thought it was very bold of them to call it witchcraft.
We were all glad, though, that all the men were saved, but that Violet, who was an unfortunate woman pregnant with someone else's baby, was murdered, right? We were all happy with how that turned out.
Yeah, everyone who deserved to be saved was saved.
I wrote a note saying, does the amount of cringe around that lunch table with the main characters and all of the misogyny from the town wrap back around to support some sort of theme? And I'm like, no, because nobody learned anything.
Mm-hmm. Yep, nobody learns anything. Everything gets to go back to the way it was before.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it sort of wraps up, and Bradford's like, hey, well, we solved the mystery, but let's ask the CDC if we can take that paralyzed woman back to our institute so we can study her for a while. Let's see if they'd be cool with us just, like, taking her. And the CDC guy's like, oh, you know what? I don't really care, but you're too late. The government has already abducted her and taken her away for their own studies.
And that is supposedly, like, even more menacing than the Morpheus Institute doing the exact same thing.
It's true.
Maybe Nathan should have just called one of his friends that are in the high levels of government. Be like, hey, by the way, pull some strings for me.
I mean, that I thought about that too. But what I really like too is Kate's just like, what happened to her? And we see her getting wheeled away. And Nathan said, they took her. And Kate's like, who are they? And he's like, I don't know. Like, he truly is just like, she asks, like, who are they? And he's just like, I have no idea. I just said it because it sounded scary.
Oh.
But that's the wrap up of episode 4 there. So I don't know. Do you guys have any final notes before we get into ratings on this? Any big thoughts we didn't cover?
Did we mention that last episode was our sexiest episode?
I don't know if we had. Thanks for, but we should really let people know. Very sexy episode.
Yeah. Oh, and I should say the Violet character, the succubus, was played by Devin Odessa, who I only really remember from My So-Called Life. She was the friend in My So-Called Life.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, let's get in the ratings then. It seems like we've covered everything we need to talk about these episodes. So let's start with the first episode, Night Terrors. Meric, we usually do this out of kind of 10, sort of the IMDb star scale of ratings. So out of 10, what would you rate this episode?
You know, I want to give it a 4 because the mystery actually had me interested a couple of times, but just the jarringness of all of the cuts and the weird stuff, I got to bring it down to like 3.5.
3.5. I think that's a very reasonable score. Jordan, what do you think?
I'm right at that same level. I'm going to give it a 4 to 10. I think the biggest problem this episode was that when you stop and think about it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it does feel like a bit of a rewrite problem.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I feel the same. I'm gonna go 3.52, I guess, but there's like a mystery there, but yeah, none of it really jives as soon as you have to think about it, and it's just another weird episode. I mean, certainly better than its pilot, but like still not a great episode. So Meric, let's get into the Forlorn then. What do you want to give Forlorn?
That's a 2.
Generous too.
I think so. I think that it felt like shows that come later that do this better. And so, like, I'm a huge Supernatural fan. I love that show. And so this kind of felt like that. You go out, you solve the mystery, and you interact with a new cast of people in an interesting sort of area. And I was like, there's a couple of things that I recognize and could be good, but nah, can't get it higher than a 2.
Fair enough. I'm going to go ahead and just I think I'm just going to give it a 1. It feels like a mess. It feels like the episode they banged out a draft with a couple ideas and we're like, good enough. Because like CDC guy's important for the first 5 minutes, then he's gone. Sheriff pops up for 5 minutes to kill a person, then he's gone. There's like all these like bigger ideas under the surface that they're just like, I don't know, misogyny, I guess. I've heard of it before. I don't really know what it is, but maybe if we drop it in there, it'll help the episode.
I'm going to be in the minority here, and let me just, before I give my score, I know it's bad, and
I like where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with all your points. However, for whatever reason, I found this to be the most entertaining episode of all of them we've watched so far, and I loved how bad it was. I loved how dickish the characters were. I love how it didn't make any sense. It was so dumb and bad, and it was like fan fiction. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 just because I enjoyed it the whole way.
Wow.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there's something to be said for a bad episode of television, but
that's true.
I'm glad it clicked for you. I was just like, oh, how much longer? Anyway, I guess that wraps it up. 2 par for the course episodes for Sleepwalkers from what we're finding out. But we'll keep going, see what happens next week, I guess. Meric, thank you so much for joining us this week. You've got some stuff to plug, or at least I'm going to plug some of your stuff. So you've got your own podcast, Massive Damage Adventures. You want to give us a little synopsis for what that's about, so our listeners might want to listen?
Yeah, for sure. So it is an actual play podcast. So we play pen and paper role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, Star Trek, Star Wars, all sorts of various games. Every episode that we do is a different game, and we've got a pool of about 40 to 50 players, and so it's always a different cast of people, and we make our characters, we play through a single session story. It's like 4 hours of us just messing around in whatever game it is. We also do bonus episodes where we review games that have been given to us by publishers as promotional copies. And we have a companion podcast to that called Massive Damage Campaigns, where we're playing an ongoing Dungeons and Dragons adventure with the same players and the same story going on and on. That's into its 2nd season right now, and that one is sponsored by Monty Cook Games with their book Arcana of the Ancients. Both podcasts are also sponsored by Roll20, which is pretty cool. And the last sort of big project we're doing is that we're doing a short Twitch campaign. When is this episode going to be coming out?
This is going to be out in 2 weeks.
Okay, so that'll be basically a week before we do this live streamed Twitch campaign, which is going to be superheroes, teenage superheroes that all work or hang out at a mall, and we're going to be playing that Friday nights in April.
Yeah, this will be out on the 30th, so it'll be just before you do that.
Beautiful.
I just wanted to say, what I really like about your podcast is because you're doing a whole bunch of different like types of RPGs, like you'll do these one-offs and like really see them. You always do this great like 10 to 20 minute opening where you like sort of break down what the sort of RPG is, like, you know, the theme, or like if it's Star Trek and you kind of talk about that. You talk about the mechanics of how it works and like how the players play and kind of how the whole system of the RPG works. There's a lot of systems out there, so that's something I always really appreciate about it. So
thank you.
You should check that out if you're listening to this. You might enjoy some RPG action on Massive Damage Adventures. Not to prolong this, but I'm gonna pitch a couple more things I want to know. You just wrote our campaign for the Expanse RPG, didn't you?
Yeah, so that is in its second round of editing. I was brought on by Green Ronin Publishing to write an adventure for an upcoming book called The Free Navy Conflict. So that's going to be published probably this year, maybe early next year. And the adventure that I wrote, you get to play as the Free Navy and be real evil.
So if you're an Expanse fan, watch out for that. And not to drag this on longer, but I saw you're doing something. You're a very busy man. I don't know where you find the time, but I saw that you and a friend also started a Twitter account where you will recommend RPGs people can play. So if someone wants to try an RPG, maybe they've never tried one before, like a real pen and paper roleplay game, you can tweet at this Twitter account at RPG_what, and they will talk to you and they will figure out what RPG you might enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. That came out of a conversation just before we were playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. We play that group every Sunday, and we were just like, you know what I miss in this time of pandemic? Just being at a game store browsing and somebody is like looking at a game and you go, oh, did you have any questions about that? And sort of like helping somebody find the game that they were looking for. And we were like, we should do a Twitter about that. And then my buddy Ian was like, I made it. Here's the password. And we're like, cool, let's do it.
Thank you again, Meric, for joining us. And listener, if you want to see some clips from the show, we'll of course have those on Instagram and Twitter. The handle there is @ContinuumDrag. And if you want to email us about what a sexy episode that was, you can get us at continuumdrag@gmail.com. But that wraps it up for this episode. Listener, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, I will see you next week.
See you then. Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Humes.